If you ask most people what their number one fear is, what do you think it is?
Do you think that the public will perceive you any differently after all that's been in the news about you?
People's number one fear is public humiliation.
Okay, so that's almost 4 years ago, dude. I mean, I've moved on. I guess you haven't.
I don't give a fuck anymore. I'm not afraid of it.
Let's move on, dude. Come on.
Because I've had plenty.
Thanks a lot for joining us, Mel. Take care.
Bye-bye. Asshole.
It started with a question whispered in the heart of a man who had it all, yet couldn't look away from a crucifix. The path to the Passion of the Christ didn't follow the rules of Hollywood. It defied them. And at the center of it was someone the industry couldn't quite figure out, a man once celebrated, later ridiculed, now impossible to ignore. This isn't just a story about a film. It's the story of a man who risked everything to tell one.
Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello to Mel Gibson.
It's good to finally meet your friends.
Shall we not revenge?
Mel Gibson did something no one in Hollywood expected. He made the Passion of the Christ. And not just made it. He financed it himself, directed it, co-wrote it, and turned it into the most successful independent film of all time. Over $612 million at the global box office. Without studio backing, without big marketing, with every major headline stacked against it. From the very beginning, the film drew controversy. Critics said it was too violent. Others claimed it was anti-Semitic. Some groups called for a boycott before the first trailer even dropped. Studios stayed away. Hollywood turned its back. And still it broke records. So, why did Gibson do it? Why risk his career, his reputation, his future to tell this one story? To answer that, we have to go back. Before the spotlight, before the scandals, before he became a household name. Mel Gibson was a boy from Peekskill, New York. At 12, his family moved to Australia. That move had roots in something deeper. His great-grandfather had fled Ireland during the Great Famine, a devastating time of starvation and death in the mid-1800s. More than 1 million perished. Millions more fled to places like America, Britain, and Australia. Ireland, at the time, was overwhelmingly Catholic. Its faith was shaped by missionaries like St. Patrick, yes, the same one behind the holiday, now marked with green beer and parades. But for the Irish, St. Patrick was more than that. He represented a deep, unshakable faith. That Catholic legacy shaped Gibson's childhood. But his father, Hutton Gibson, held beliefs that stirred controversy even before The Passion was released. He was a writer, a thinker, and part of a fringe Catholic movement that rejected the authority of modern popes. They were known as sedevacantists, from the Latin sede vacante, meaning the chair is empty. In their view, no pope since 1958 has been legitimate. It's an extreme stance, and one that only added to the firestorm Mel Gibson would face as he prepared to release a film the world wasn't ready for.
In 1958, I was 2 years old, right? And there was a very funny thing that happened in the conclave. You know, usually there's white and black smoke that goes out of the chimneys to tell you, we have a pope, you know, habemus papam, you know. And the white smoke came out, and everybody cheered, and they went crazy. And then about a half an hour later, black smoke came out. That never in history has that happened.
Without diving too deep into church history, this movement gained traction among Catholics who rejected change. Specifically, they opposed the Second Vatican Council, a major event that reshaped the Catholic Church in the early 1960s. That's where the divide began. And for Mel Gibson, growing up in that environment meant one thing. Faith wasn't just tradition. It was identity. It was serious. And it would eventually become the fire behind the Passion of the Christ.
It isn't what it purports to be anymore. It's moved away from what it was intended to be and what it is, and it's running an entirely different religion. I actually don't adhere to a post-conciliar church.
Vatican II aimed to modernize the Catholic Church, but to traditionalists like Hutton Gibson, it was a betrayal. He believed it was a plan to destroy the church from within. That belief mattered because it shaped how Mel Gibson was raised. Friends from his youth say Mel lived in his father's shadow, always trying to measure up. Hutton was strong-willed, deeply devout, and fiercely opinionated. Mel's childhood, think Simba. If Simba had a DUI and went to a strict Catholic school in New South Wales, At St. Leo's, Mel stood out, not for his faith, but for his American accent. He got teased for it even though. By the time he hit the screen, he sounded fully Australian. He had learned to blend in, but the weight of his upbringing stayed with him, in faith, in family, and later in film.
And then they have something called foreign aid, which is, it'd be okay if it was feeding starving children or something, but it's not. They're giving many millions to countries like Red China, North Vietnam, South Korea, to develop steel industries. And they give this money to them interest-free. But you know who has to pay the interest on that money? The Australian taxpayer has to pay the interest on that money.
The bullying Mel faced in school left a mark. By his teenage years, he was acting out fighting, smoking, drinking, pushing back against rules and expectations. Nothing unusual for a teenager, but in Mel's case, the rebellion ran deep, especially the drinking. It wasn't just a phase. It became a pattern, and it would follow him into adulthood, even as his career took off. Still, there was another side. At the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney, he discovered acting and something clicked. Then came his big break almost by accident. He landed an audition for Mad Max after showing up bruised and bloodied from a real fight. And somehow, that wild energy was exactly what they were looking for. The role launched a franchise, and Mel Gibson became a star.
I was a mess. I mean, my eyes were shut, jaw knocked off the hinge, nose broken, everything. I was like, 28 pounds of hamburger meat. It was just not a nice sight. And they were staring at me in horror.
What the hell happened to you? And I gave them a brief explanation. I was a little embarrassed about it. And they said, let's take a few Polaroids. So I'm like, being
That defiant edge Mel Gibson carried, it wasn't just teenage rebellion. It became part of who he was. And strangely, it's that same fire that would help him push through the storm surrounding the Passion of the Christ. After Mad Max, success came quickly. He starred in Lethal Weapon, voiced John Smith in Disney's Pocahontas, even charmed audiences in romantic comedies like What Women Want. Mel loved acting on screen and on stage. But he didn't stop there. In 1989, he launched his own production company, Icon Productions. Years later, that very company would make The Passion possible when no one else would touch it. But long before that, in '93, Gibson stepped behind the camera for the first time with The Man Without a Face. Then came the film that defined him. In 1995, he directed, produced, and starred in Braveheart, a film that won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. And with that, Mel Gibson proved he wasn't just a star. He was a storyteller.
and he'd been with me a couple of years. He's an incredible guy. He's funny. And I woke up one day and he came into the room and he said, I had a dream last night. I said, so did I. It was the weirdest dream ever. We were in pre-production. I said, I dreamed we were wearing tuxedos and crying. And comes this, so I just kind of said, oh, that's interesting. And neither one of us said the O word because we didn't want to jinx it, but yeah, we just say, same dream.
Tuxedos, but you didn't say statue or anything like that.
No, we were in tuxedos and we were crying.
By the mid-90s, Mel Gibson had Hollywood in the palm of his hand. If he wanted a project greenlit, it happened. Any project except The Passion of the Christ. But we'll get to that. From the outside, things looked perfect. Box office hits, awards, critical acclaim. It seemed like everything was going right. But behind the scenes, his personal life was unraveling. Mel had been battling something since he was 13, alcohol. What started as a way to cope with bullying grew into a deep, destructive habit. By 1991, his drinking spiraled. His wife and his agent urged him to get help. That's when he began attending AA meetings, a turning point, but not a fix. Because darkness still lingered. Hollywood might celebrate success, but it's not always kind to the broken. And Mel was breaking. He's always had a complicated relationship with fame, with the industry, like he could feel something was off even if he couldn't quite name it.
I mean, this is a bizarre place. And it doesn't take very long, and I'm sure you've experienced this if you've stayed here for any length of time. It's an odd place. I had a whole bunch of weird paranoid suspicions about what the hell was going on because there was a lot of stuff I couldn't understand.
Right.
And nobody was really bothering to explain it to me. And you imagine all these horror stories there that you think, surely that couldn't be.
Despite his gripes with Hollywood, he managed to maintain a few close relationships in the industry. The truth is, he and I have a friendship that spans well over 2 decades, and he's a stand-up guy. He always has been for me. And certainly when I was not hireable, he put his on the line and I couldn't get insured, and he said, I'll take that chance.
Fame, pressure, and alcohol eventually took their toll. Gibson later admitted he reached a point where he didn't want to live anymore, but he wasn't ready to die either. He called it a desperate, horrible place to be. And in that darkness, the idea for the Passion of the Christ began to grow. It wasn't sudden. This was something he had carried for years. Since the early 90s, when his world was falling apart, he had wanted to tell the story of Jesus. He was in the middle of a faith crisis, disconnected from what he once believed. So, in a search for clarity, he began to imagine the Gospels not as distant stories, but as real events. I just kept having visions about it. He once said, I kept wondering what were those 12 hours like. And so he began to picture them, frame by frame, pain by pain, trying to understand not just the suffering of Jesus, but why it mattered.
I just kept having visions about it, and about, what was that like 12 hours like?
That's what he set out to do. Take the images that had haunted his mind and bring them to the screen. A raw, honest depiction of the final hours of Jesus. But it wouldn't be easy. There were obstacles. Big ones. The first accusations of anti-Semitism. Even before the film hit theaters, the backlash was intense. So intense, it could have shut the whole project down. Where did it come from? The controversy began long before anyone saw the film. A leaked version of the script circulated and sparked concerns in Jewish communities. The fear that it might revive old, harmful stereotypes, that it could stir up resentment or hate. I watched the film recently, looking for anything that might support those claims. But what I saw was a movie closely aligned with the gospel accounts. Unflinching, yes, but not inflammatory. Still, the damage had been done. The criticism was loud and relentless.
I was very troubled. I was disturbed. I believe that this movie has the potential to fuel anti-Semitism, to reinforce it.
So, was the backlash justified, or was it an overreaction in the film? The Pharisees, Jewish religious leaders of the time, are portrayed as part of the force opposing Jesus, alongside the Roman soldiers who carried out the crucifixion. But here's what often gets overlooked. Jesus was Jewish. So were his disciples. So was Mary. In fact, Mary was portrayed by Maya Morgenstern, a Jewish actress and the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. The film's antagonist roles weren't drawn from modern politics, but from historical accounts in the Gospels. That nuance matters. But in the heat of controversy, it's often the first thing to get lost.
We found the script beautifully, very poetic, and very philosophical.
It's true, if you're Jewish, you might view the Passion of the Christ through a different lens. And that's valid. But the movie's focus was never to vilify the Pharisees. It wasn't about blame. It was about suffering, redemption, and love. And that's the heart of the Gospels too. So, who killed Jesus? The honest answer, we all did. That's the core of Christian belief. Jesus died for the sins of humanity. Is this an anti-Semitic film? No. At least, I don't believe so. And many others don't either. But the criticism is complex. It goes deeper than one film. Christianity and Judaism have a long, painful history, especially during the Middle Ages, when violence and persecution left deep wounds. Tensions endured for centuries, and those memories still echo today. But something changed in the 1960s. At the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church made a bold move. In a declaration called Nostra Aetate Latin for in our time, the Church officially denounced all forms of anti-Semitism. Section 4 specifically addressed Judaism rejecting persecution, affirming the shared heritage between Christians and Jews, and calling for true respect, not just tolerance. It was a turning point, but not everyone embraced the change. As I mentioned earlier, traditionalist groups like the Sedevacantists rejected Vatican II. They saw it as a betrayal. And that brings us back to Hutton Gibson. He believed Vatican II was part of a conspiracy to dismantle the church, one he claimed was backed by Masonic Jews. Yes, his views were extreme, and they weren't just private opinions. They became part of the public backlash against the Passion of the Christ. Because for some critics, it wasn't just about the movie, it was about the man who made it, and the beliefs he may have inherited.
I think people wondered if your father's views were your views on this.
Their whole agenda here, my detractors, is to drive a wedge between me and my father. He's my father. Gotta leave it alone, Diane. Gotta leave it alone.
They weren't the only controversy surrounding the Passion of the Christ. Another major point of debate, the violence. From the start, critics called it excessive, some even compared it to a horror film. Time magazine went as far as listing it among the most ridiculously violent movies ever made. And to be fair, there's a lot of blood. Some scenes are brutal, drawn out, and hard to watch. But was it over the top personally? I don't think so. And clearly, neither did Mel Gibson. In his view, the violence wasn't just for shock. It was part of the story, part of the truth he wanted to show. He believed that to understand the depth of Christ's sacrifice, you had to feel it, see it, not sanitize it. And he once said if he had filmed what really happened, no one would have been able to watch it. Not because it was offensive, but because it would have been unbearable.
Did you ever think it was too much?
Of course it was too much. I wanted it to be shocking. And I also wanted it to be extreme.
I mean, if it was easy, it isn't worth much.
I wanted it to push the viewer over the edge.
And believe me, I did a lot of research on it. And according to all the research, it was way worse than that, anything I showed you.
The violence in The Passion of the Christ isn't just for shock. It's what gives the film its emotional weight. It makes the suffering personal, not just something you watch, but something you feel. Roger Ebert, one of the most respected film critics, called it the most violent film he'd ever seen. And still, he gave it 4 out of 4 stars. The film doesn't hold back. Roman soldiers beat Jesus. They force a crown of thorns on his head. They rip the flesh from his back. And that's before the crucifixion even begins. Naturally, it received an R rating from the MPAA. That limited the potential audience, which meant less revenue, making an already risky film even riskier. Hoping for a broader release, Gibson recut the film and removed 5 minutes of the most graphic scenes. But it wasn't enough. Even the edited version, re-released in 2005, was still too intense for a PG-13 rating. And there was more working against the film. It wasn't in English. It was filmed entirely in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Latin, with English subtitles, a huge gamble for a mainstream audience. And Gibson financed it himself. The budget, $30 million. Marketing, another $15 million, all out of his own pocket, through Icon Productions. It was a massive risk, but he believed in the story. The Passion of the Christ focuses on the final 12 hours of Jesus' life, his suffering and crucifixion. Shot primarily in Italy, most of the filming took place in and around Rome. Jesus was played by Jim Caviezel. Like Gibson, he was a devout Catholic. When he heard Mel Gibson was directing a film about Christ, he didn't hesitate. Even after Gibson warned him, this role could end your career. Jim accepted anyway, no regrets. But the role came at a cost. He filmed some scenes with just one eye open, suffering severe migraines. He dislocated his shoulder while carrying the cross, battled hypothermia, lung infections, pneumonia, and in one of the strangest moments on set, he was struck by lightning. For Jim Caviezel, it was all worth it. He believed in the film deeply, and he stood by Mel Gibson. Caviezel said clearly, "If I thought this film was anti-Semitic, I wouldn't have done it." Maya Morgenstern, the Jewish actress who played Mary, felt the same, but even their support wasn't enough to calm the storm or attract studio backing. Gibson had financed the film himself, but he still needed distribution. That turned out to be just as hard. He was under contract with 20th Century Fox. They had a solid relationship with his company, Icon Productions. But when the controversy heated up and threats of boycott emerged, Fox walked away. They didn't want anything to do with the Passion of the Christ. Gibson was stuck until Newmarket Films stepped in, an independent distributor. They had released movies like Monster and Donnie Darko. Not exactly blockbusters, but they were bold enough to take the risk. With distribution finally in place, Gibson faced another hurdle: marketing. Think about it, a religious film, in subtitles, with no A-listers, wrapped in controversy, no studio support. It looked like a box office nightmare. But Gibson had something better than a PR team. He had a built-in audience, and he had the trust of the church. as long as the film didn't cross into blasphemy. Christian communities were ready to back it. Gibson partnered with Faith Highway, a Christian media agency, to create custom promos for churches across America. Major denominations like the United Methodist Church and Seventh-day Adventists supported the film. Many even set up booths outside screenings to answer questions and share the gospel. Gibson also reached out to evangelical leaders. He screened the film for over 800 pastors, and they responded with overwhelming support. What Hollywood had rejected, the church embraced. I love you, folks. Mel Gibson once told a crowd of evangelicals, about 12 years ago, when I made this film, I was literally getting the tar kicked out of me. And it was you evangelicals who stood up and supported me. I thanked you then, and I thank you again. And it wasn't just grassroots support. Some of the biggest names in the Christian world backed the film. Billy Graham, one of the most respected Christian leaders of the time, said the movie brought him to tears. He called it faithful to the Gospels and said it made him feel like he was actually there. Then came the question everyone wanted answered. What did the Pope think? In 2004, Pope John Paul II reportedly watched a private screening of The Passion of the Christ. Initial reports claimed he simply said, "It is as it was," a powerful endorsement if true. But then the Vatican backtracked. They stated the Pope had no official opinion and that he didn't comment on films or art. Why the change? Many believe it was about diplomacy. Pope John Paul II had worked hard to heal relations between Catholics and Jews. Endorsing a film accused of anti-Semitism, even if unfairly, might have complicated those efforts. So, did he say it? Didn't he? The truth remains a bit murky, but the buzz was already out there, and it worked. The Passion of the Christ premiered on Ash Wednesday, February 25, 2004, on its first day alone. It earned $26 million, despite boycotts, bans, and non-stop controversy. It became one of the most successful R-rated films of all time. It was even banned in some countries, particularly where the film clashed with Islamic teachings. In Islam, Jesus is a prophet, not the Son of God. In places like Israel, it simply wasn't released in theaters. But in predominantly Christian nations like the Philippines, audiences flocked to see it. Against all odds, Mel Gibson had done what he set out to do. He told the story of Christ's passion and people showed up. Ironically, by the time the film reached home video, 20th Century Fox, who had previously rejected it, came back around. They still didn't handle the theatrical release, but they secured distribution rights for VHS and DVD. And in the early 2000s, that was still a massive market long before streaming took over. In the end, The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a film, it was a mission, and Gibson saw it through. Even though 20th Century Fox made money from home distribution, it's safe to say they probably regretted passing on the theatrical release. Because in theaters, audiences experienced something unforgettable: the final 12 hours of Jesus' life, brought to the screen with raw, brutal honesty. The film opens in Gethsemane. Jesus is seen in deep anguish, praying alone moments before Judas arrives and betrays him with a kiss. He's arrested and taken before Caiaphas, the high priest who accuses him of blasphemy and pushes for his death. That portrayal of Caiaphas as the primary antagonist fueled some of the early backlash. But the film follows what's written. Caiaphas sends Jesus to Pontius Pilate. Since under Jewish law they couldn't execute him themselves, Pilate hesitates. But when given the choice, Jesus or Barabbas, the crowd chooses Barabbas. And the path to the cross begins. The film becomes brutal. Jesus is tied to a pillar, beaten with whips that tear open his skin. Then he's crowned with thorns and mocked in front of the people. The crowd calls for crucifixion, and Gibson wanted it to feel real. Instead of a light prop, they used a heavy wooden cross. So heavy, actor Jim Caviezel dislocated his shoulder carrying it. The crucifixion scenes pushed the film to its R rating. Nails driven through Jesus' hands, blood pouring from his side after being pierced by a Roman spear. For Caviezel, those scenes were more than acting. He suffered hypothermia while hanging on the cross. His limbs went numb, his jaw trembled, and he could barely speak. He described it as knives cutting through him with every breath. The film ends with Jesus being placed in the tomb and rising. The resurrection scene is short but powerful. The film was complete, and despite everything stacked against it, It was a massive success. When asked how he felt after the release, Gibson said, "I just survived it. I was bleeding by the end. There was so much pushback, so much pressure, and then silence." After The Passion, Gibson continued making bold films. In 2006, he directed Apocalypto, another historical epic, another foreign language film, another project he fully financed. $40 million budget, $120 million worldwide box office. Quentin Tarantino called it a masterpiece. Scorsese and Spike Lee praised it too. Gibson had earned respect at least as a filmmaker. But then, everything changed. One Thursday night, Gibson was pulled over on the Pacific Coast Highway, speeding, drunk, with a bottle of tequila in his car. That night, he reportedly made deeply offensive, anti-Semitic remarks to the arresting officer, including asking, "Are you a Jew?" It was ugly, shameful, and he later admitted it. When asked how he felt about those words, he didn't dodge it. "Oh yeah," he said, "absolutely. They sound horrible, and I'm ashamed they came out of my mouth." After his arrest, things spiraled fast. Mel Gibson became combative, profane, even violent, banging himself against the inside of the police car. Later, he admitted he didn't know how much he drank that night, but he remembered it was tequila, and he remembered breaking. "I was in the back of the car, wailing," he said, trying to escape something deeper than alcohol. He confessed he had been harboring old resentment. "I thought I had forgiven it," he said, "but the human heart's a funny thing." That resentment, it traced back to the Passion of the Christ. Before anyone saw a single frame of the film, he endured a year of public criticism and attacks. And even after the movie's success, he felt wounded, like he had been unjustly treated. That pain, buried under the surface, came boiling out. Then came 2010. Mel was recorded yelling threats and racial slurs at his then-girlfriend. He later pled no contest to a misdemeanor battery charge. And just like that, Hollywood turned its back. He wasn't just controversial anymore. He was blacklisted. His career, it seemed, was over. Until someone stood up for him. It was actor Robert Downey Jr. At an awards show, he told the world, "Mel helped me when I couldn't get sober. He believed in me when no one else did. He cast me in a lead role, kept a roof over my head, and asked for nothing in return except that I help the next guy." Then Downey Jr. turned to the room. "Unless you're completely without sin, you're in the wrong industry. Forgive him like you forgave me." And just like that, Mel Gibson was back. A resurrection, in every sense of the word. Speaking of resurrections, there's one more film on the horizon, a sequel to The Passion of the Christ. Gibson confirmed it's in development. And yes, Jim Caviezel will return as Jesus. The title, The Resurrection. Gibson said he's been working on it for years, and he's sitting on two versions, one more traditional, and the other, something wild, like an acid trip, he joked. Something more spiritual, more symbolic. He's not rushing it. He knows the weight this story carries, but he believes when it's ready, it could become the biggest film in history.